This is a 2006 Subaru Baja Turbo, and it's rather strange. That's because it's a Subaru that's also a truck, that's also a car, and it has a turbocharged engine and a manual transmission. That's right, this is a high-performance manual Subaru car truck. And today, I'm going to review it. I've borrowed this Baja Turbo from a viewer here in the San Diego area, and I'm thrilled that I have, because I've always wanted to review one of these, largely because this is one of the most bizarre vehicles in modern memory. The story goes like this. Back in the 90s, Subaru invented a new market segment with the Outback, the tall, all-wheel drive station wagon. And that was so successful that they started looking around for other new market segments to invent. So they made a tall, all-wheel drive sedan, the Outback SUS, and then they decided to make a pickup version. And that, of course, is the Baja. Now, the Baja came out for the 2003 model year, and it was only available with all-wheel drive. Initially, you could only get it with a 165 horsepower four-cylinder, but later they started offering it with a turbocharged version of that engine with 210 horsepower and 235 pound-feet of torque. That doesn't sound like all that much, but it was capable of getting this thing from 0 to 60 in 7 seconds, which makes this a lot quicker than any other pickup truck based on a mid-sized station wagon. Of course, it's also slower since, it's the only one. Anyway, the Baja came out back in 2003, the turbo model came out in 2004, and pretty quickly Subaru realized that this wasn't going to be the sales success they were hoping for. They pulled the plug on the whole thing after 2006. The car had been on sale for just 4 years. But in the years since, the Baja has gained kind of a cult following in the Subaru community, and these days, nice used Bajas can easily sell between $10,000 and $15,000, which is double what you would pay for a used Outback from the same era. Now, people have been asking me to do a review on the Baja for years, and I haven't done one before because I wanted to hold out for the right one. I didn't want an automatic, and I didn't want the base engine. I wanted to review a manual turbo Baja, the Baja Holy Grail, and that's this. So today I'm going to review this car, and I'm going to show you all of the quirks and features of a rather quirky Subaru. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a DougScore. And for more of my thoughts on the Baja Turbo, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also rounded up a list of some of the rarest modern affordable cars currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. Now, I'm going to start the Baja's quirks and features by discussing its quirkiest feature, and that would be the bed, because, how often do you see a Subaru with a bed? Now, in basing this vehicle on a station wagon, Subaru couldn't exactly make it huge like a lot of pickups, which are much longer. They had to kind of keep it to normal car proportions because the platform didn't really allow it to stretch all that much. So Subaru had to make a choice. If they wanted to put in a 5-foot bed, they would have had to sacrifice interior space and make it a 2-door vehicle. Or they could have gone for a smaller bed and make a 4-door vehicle. And that's what they chose to do, to have a larger interior. But the problem is, there's only a 3.5-foot bed back here, and that's just nothing in the pickup truck world. Basically, every other truck has at least a 5-foot bed, and that gave the Baja a huge disadvantage in terms of pickup truck practicality right off the bat. But Subaru had an idea that would remove that disadvantage from the Baja. Check this out. You put down the tailgate, and you can see inside the bed, there is a fence. So you might be thinking, what does this thing do? Well, if you remove a couple of nylon straps keeping the fence in place, then you go into the bed, the fence swings around and it becomes a bed extender. And with the tailgate down and the fence in place, you now have a 5-foot bed, just like a lot of other pickup trucks. Now, you might think it's a little odd to have this flopping around, but you can use those same nylon straps that kept it in place in the bed to tie down the fence to the tailgate, and then it won't move around and you can carry larger items back here. Now, the fence wasn't a perfect solution. It did have one problem in that the edges are kind of rounded. So if you had some large item that would take up an entire pickup truck bed and it was square, you still might have a problem getting it in here. But it did take care of the big bed practicality issue that Baja owners faced if they wanted to use it as an actual pickup truck. But in solving that problem, Subaru created another, and you can easily see it from your angle right now. You see, in order to use the Baja like a normal truck with a 5-foot bed, you had to put down the tailgate and you had to put the fence in place. And as you can see, that means every time you want to do pickup things, your license plate isn't showing, and that would never fly in any rational jurisdiction. So Subaru came up with yet another cool idea. If you go on the tailgate, that's where the license plate is mounted, and you will see these two little plastic buttons on either side. If you push them, you can fold out the license plate. And then when the tailgate is down, the license plate is facing backwards and it is showing to anyone who's behind you, thus negating the problem of you having to put the tailgate down and the license plate not being visible. That is some pretty ingenious thinking, actually. And since we're on the subject of the license plate, a little story about this one. Now, if you live in California, you can tell. For those of you who can't, this is a commercial license plate in California to be used on pickup trucks and vehicles like that. Now, the owner of this car told me that when he got it, it had a passenger car license plate, which is not allowed on pickup trucks. And he was driving it along one day, and the police pulled him over and they said, "You can't have a passenger car plate on this truck. You have to go and get a truck plate." Little did the officer know that he was injecting himself into the great debate of what exactly the Baja is. It's a car-based station wagon, so it should have a car plate, but it's also a truck, so it should have a truck plate. What is it exactly? A Baja. But anyway, moving back to the bed for a few other interesting quirks and features back here, I want to go back to the fence for a second, which is of course actually called a bed extender. Now the bed extender was optional, you didn't have to get it, but most people did get it if they wanted to use their truck for truck things. The problem was that if you didn't have it in the extended position, it was right in the middle of your bed. So you really couldn't carry any larger items back here unless your bed extender was fully extended, because otherwise it was basically splitting your bed in half and preventing you from carrying anything big back here. It was a little bit impractical, and you couldn't easily remove it. It doesn't just clip right in or out. Instead, taking it out is kind of a cumbersome process that requires tools, so it couldn't be done very easily. That was the curse of the fence. Next up, another noteworthy item in the bed is this little warning label over on the driver's side warning you not to fill up gas cans in the bed of your Baja. That warning label is actually surprisingly common in pickup trucks, not all that unusual. The thing I like is this nice little drawing of a Baja, perfect profile of exactly what this car is and not just a generic pickup truck. And the other wonderful thing about the bed in this vehicle is that there are bars coming down from the roof and going on to the side of the bed. Now, Subaru said these bars were intended to enhance the structural rigidity. In case of a rollover, they would provide more support. Now, obviously, they could have just stuck those bars in there, but Subaru, for some reason, came up with a name for them. They called them sport bars because they added to the sportiness of your Baja, even though they were just bars in your pickup bed. Can you imagine being the guy at Subaru who was like, "I got it. We'll name those bars and we'll call them sport bars." But I'm not done with the bed just yet, even though I have now moved to the back seat. And that's because the Baja has one more bed-related trick up its sleeve. Check this out. You go into the back seat and you fold forward the seat bottom on the back seat. Then you fold forward the backrest of the back seat, and you can see there's a little panel here. You unclip this panel and you can access the bed. And that means you can actually get to the bed from the interior and vice versa. There are many ways this could be useful. Obviously, the biggest is for long items. If you have something really big that won't even fit in that bed extender, you could extend it all the way through the cabin if you want, and suddenly you can carry like a 12-foot pole in your Baja. Of course, there is one other way you can use your interior to bed pass-through system. That was easy. No problem at all. You can do that on the highway. Now, with that little bed pass-through into the interior, it's worth noting that the rear window is fixed. It stays in place. So you can't like fold that down or fold it away and have the entire back open up. You only have that little pass-through. Another interesting item is that when you fold the backrest for the back seat down, you can see there's some netting there. I guess the theory there is you can stick something in it when it's down, but you could also stick something in it when it's up. Not really sure why they bothered with that netting, but it's there for a little extra storage. And obviously when the seat is folded back into place, it's rather hidden storage. But anyway, moving on from the bed to the interior, I'm gonna start in back since I'm already back here. One interesting thing about this car that I didn't know until I started filming it today is that all Bajas are 4-seaters, 2 in the front and 2 in the back, which I find to be interesting because Subaru went to all the trouble to make sure it was a 4-door car and preserve that interior practicality. And then they had to do all sorts of crazy stuff to give it a longer bed, and then they didn't give it a middle seat, so you don't have 5 seats in your Baja. Instead, what you have in the middle is this nice little contraption. It has a couple of cup holders, and then behind that, there's this little plastic cargo storage door that opens. But then my personal favorite thing is on the backrest, you have this netting back here for cargo, and it says Baja on it, just in case you were wondering who provided your cargo netting. One other interesting item in the back of the Baja is something that was interesting in a lot of Subarus from this era and earlier, and that is when you roll down the back window, it starts to roll down normally, and then it kind of makes a turn and goes down at an angle for a couple of inches. It did this in order to kind of conform to the shape of the door panel, which of course has a cutout for the wheel arch, by making that turn that allows the window to roll down a few extra inches that it would if it just went down perfectly straight like in most cars. Now, next we move on to the front seats, where there are a few interesting items worth noting, starting with the sunroof, which is just radically small. You open up the sunroof cover and you can see my hand can basically go across the entire thing. I guess that's because the Baja just doesn't have all that much roof. So if you want to actually open the sunroof, there's not a place for a large one to go. So instead, you get a rather small one. Next up, another interesting item in the interior. Over to the left of the steering wheel, there is a little button marked cargo lamp. You press that and then a little light turns on in the bed to help illuminate the bed if it's nighttime and you're trying to load stuff or unload stuff back there. A lot of pickup trucks have that, and I'm surprised Subaru went through all the thought to put in a cargo lamp in this thing. One thing Subaru didn't do though, in the gauge cluster, there's a little diagram of a car from the top down that shows when you have a door open, and you can see that's not a truck, it's a car. Because I mean, they weren't going to make an entire gauge cluster just to change this little door diagram. I don't blame them for that one. One other item I like in the front of this car is the floor mats. You take a look at them, you can see they don't just say Subaru, they say Baja, which is infinitely cooler because this vehicle is so rare. Take these floor mats out and put them in an Outback, and you will instantly have street cred with the Baja community. With that said, truthfully, most of the interior in this car is just pretty straightforward. The weirdness is the styling, the rarity, the bed. The front here is pretty much like an Outback or a Legacy from this time, and Subaru wasn't taking a lot of risks with interiors back then. Now, with that said, there are some interesting items to be found in the glove box. For instance, I have right here the original window sticker, and it shows a sticker price of $26,614, which is kind of a bargain, actually. Now, as you can see, appearing in the options list on this window sticker is that bed extender, or what I called the fence back there, which was $313, a bargain to give you 2 extra feet of bed. You also have, though, in the options list, a rear differential protector. That cost 89 bucks to make sure your rear differential wouldn't get smashed up when you took your Baja off-roading, which no one did. Another thing I have here that I really like is the Subaru Baja accessories catalog. There's some rather interesting and exciting accessories in here. For instance, the sport activity lights. You could mount auxiliary lights on the roof racks, and they have little covers that say Baja on them. And that actually looks pretty cool. I think I would have gotten those. Now, the other interesting item in here, you have the Baja owner's manual, which isn't particularly unusual or quirky, but on the very first page, you open it to an off-center line drawing of the Baja, and written in the corner it says UBF 046AA. Ah, yes, the Baja, my car, good old UBF 046AA. How I love seeing you there. Now, next up, I want to move on to the outside of the Baja, and specifically, I want to talk about colors. Now, when the Baja first came out in '03, it was two-tone. At the time, Subaru felt that two-tone signified utility, and all of the Outbacks in North America were two-tone, so they wanted to do that with the Baja as well. Now, unfortunately, their launch color was two-tone yellow with silver on the bottom. That was not particularly popular, and they eventually dropped it. And after a while, they just started painting all the Baja models one color, like this one, which obviously is black. Now, the interesting thing is they kept the cladding on there that was the second color in the two-tone paint scheme. So when you look at this, you can see that it's black, and then there's cladding that's also painted black, kind of a reminder of how that two-tone experiment didn't really work out. Now, the weirdness of the cladding on the exterior of this car is especially apparent when you get to the fuel door, which for some reason bisects the cladding. So part of it goes into the cladding and part of it is on the body, and none of it really looks all that good. Now, another odd item on the outside of the Baja is the taillight assembly situation. And it's odd because you look at it and you think, well, this is the brake light, the big red piece, and then this is the turn signal, the white piece above it. That's obvious, that's how it is on most cars, but that's not how it is on the Baja. Instead, the red piece is the brake light and also the turn signal. The little white piece above it is actually the reverse light. Very strange. So you have a brake light turn signal combo, and then you have the reverse light above. I never knew that in all of my years seeing Bajas in the road and knowing this was a quirky vehicle. I never knew just how quirky the brake light turn signal situation was. And next up, we move on to the front of the Baja, where there are a couple of interesting items worth noting. One is the fact that the front end is basically identical to that of the Outback. The headlights, the hood, basically the entire front clip is from the Outback. And if you looked at this car from dead on in the front, you may not know that you're looking at the pickup truck version, but indeed you are. Now, the other interesting item worth noting is the hood scoop. Only the Baja Turbo models have the hood scoop. The naturally aspirated, regular, less powerful version just has a flat hood, and that's how you can tell apart the high-performance Baja from the normal one. And speaking of the high-performance Baja, here it is, the Baja's magical 2.5-liter Boxer 4. It made 210 horsepower and 235 pound-feet of torque. It was a very strong engine, especially compared to the relatively mediocre 165 horsepower engine in the base model. Now, it's worth noting that even though the WRX at the time of the Baja had about the same horsepower output, I think that was around 227 horsepower, they didn't use the same engine. The WRX used a 2-liter Boxer 4. This used a 2.5-liter Boxer 4, and it shared the turbo version with the Outback Turbo and the Subaru Forester XT, which is another rather unusual car that Subaru is making in this period. And so those are the quirks and features of the quirky Subaru Baja. Now it's time to get it out on the road and drive it. All right, driving the Baja Turbo manual. Before I do, fun Baja fact. They built the Baja in Indiana because they mostly only sold them in North America, and apparently in Chile also. Can only imagine the Subaru South America product planner was like, I've got it, we'll sell them in Chile too. But anyway, they built them in Indiana, and when it went out of production, Subaru had all this excess capacity at the plant, because they were supposed to be building Bajas, and it was like, well, what do we do? And fortunately, their friends at Toyota had just released a new Camry that year in '07, and they were having trouble meeting demand. So Toyota called up Subaru and they said, hey, can we build some Camrys at your plant? And Subaru said, yeah, we've got all this room. And so they did. So there were Toyotas built in the Subaru Baja assembly line in '07 when this went out of production. And I bet you Subaru made more money building Camrys than building their own Bajas. But anyway, let's talk Baja, because this is kind of an impressive car. I've actually been driving it for quite a while, and it's not bad, which surprises me because I thought it would be. It's a 12-year-old Subaru. 210 horsepower isn't really all that big of a number. But I'm driving this thing around and I'm gearing down and kind of flooring it, and it has reasonable amounts of power and torque. The 0 to 60 time I quoted earlier was 7 seconds, and I suspect that's with the automatic, which was a 4-speed. If you're lucky enough to find a manual turbo Baja, I think it's quicker than that. It certainly feels quicker than that. I'm surprised just how much power it has down low, but especially how much power it has when you actually start to accelerate. To the point where I'm starting to think, do I need a truck? Do I need a car, pickup truck all-wheel drive wagon-based thing. The interior is unfortunately really dull. You know, that's one of the realities of, they didn't want to pour too much money into this thing. They knew it wasn't going to sell in huge numbers, but they thought it was kind of a cool throwback to the Brat from the old days of Subaru. So they wanted to make it, and they made it cool in the back, but in the front, I mean, it looks like I'm sitting inside a 2006 Legacy. It's just not all that exciting or interesting. It has pickup, it really goes. I mean, it's not an M4, you know, but it moves faster than you might think. The really impressive part is the power between like 3,500 and 6,000 RPM, which is of course true of turbo cars. You know, they have more power higher in the rev range. But I'm actually impressed with this thing. I think this is pretty impressive. It isn't just like quick enough. It actually feels surprisingly fun and excitingly fast. And you actually don't have to stick all that much throttle in order to get some performance out of it, which is nice. You don't really have to push too hard to have some fun. There's a little bit of play in the shifter. The clutch feels fine, a little light. You know, it's not like a Porsche or BMW transmission, but it certainly isn't bad. This wasn't an attempt to make a sports car. They just threw a kind of a larger engine and a stick shift, but they didn't like go crazy with all these sport tuning and suspension and that kind of thing. And it doesn't drive particularly sporty or engaging or exciting. I tend to think Subarus from this era are a little bit more exciting and kind of more fun than standard Toyota Camry, that kind of thing. And in that sense, it has a little bit more of feel to it, but it's not, you know, it's no WRX. And so that's the 2006 Subaru Baja Turbo manual, the holy grail of the Subaru Baja world. You poke around this thing and it's pretty easy to see why the Baja failed. I rarely hear people telling me, you know, I wish I had a car-based pickup truck with a small bed, but I'm glad they made it, and I always love seeing these things around, and I always smile when I do. And now it's time to give the Baja Turbo a DougScore. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the Baja Turbo isn't a handsome car, or really a very attractive one, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Acceleration is good. I really think it's just under 7 seconds 0 to 60, which would give it a 2 out of 10. Handling is fine, about average, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Fun factor is only okay. Outside of the relatively quick acceleration, it's not that much of a thrill, even though it's weird, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Cool factor is decent, especially for the manual turbo version. Every car enthusiast has dreamed of owning this at least once, and it gets a 5 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 20 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. This car has mediocre equipment, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Comfort is fine, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Quality is fine. The interior is decent enough, and these are pretty reliable, though we all know about the head gasket thing, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Practicality is only okay. It's all-wheel drive and a truck, which helps, but the 4 seats and limited ground clearance hamper things a bit, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Finally, value, and these are more expensive than you'd think, but they're also holding value pretty well. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 26 out of 50. Added up, and the DougScore is 46 out of 100, and I have no idea what to compare this to, but here it is up against some other oddball cars I've reviewed, plus some other stuff at a similar price point, plus some trucks. I don't know. In this company, the Baja does pretty well, I think. There were some bars in your bed. Yeah, these are sports bars. That is some BS, Mark. Oh, I gotta say that.